Okay, to get started with this, what we're going to do is we're going to use the viewfinders. So here I'm just using the viewfinder and drawing only the things that I see in B1 and trying to get all those little details. And then I just scoot over, and I just like to go in a row, so I'm just going on to B2. Notice that I go kind of in between in order to get kind of like making sure everything's lining up. And then I'm just going to go ahead and move on to row 2. And here you can see that I'm trying to get the direction that the fur is going and really paying attention to that. I'm not too worried about the shading right now. If you want to, you can go ahead and do the shading on this step. I think later on I start doing the shading anyway, but my main job right now is I'm trying to focus on the direction that the fur is going, as well as the shapes and stuff. So here what you see is I've drawn a separate grid on top of this area. I do this on the parts that have extreme amount of detail. So drawing a second grid over the previous one by dividing it into 4 spaces works really great for that. That forces you to look and see what you're supposed to be drawing. So that made it to where I could get that eye a lot more accurate. And I did the same thing for this eye because I didn't want to draw it too big or too small. So I did that little grid thing so that it makes it easier. Just make sure that on the project paper that you draw that grid super, super lightly because you want to be able to erase it. So here I'm going to continue on. Notice that I'm really paying attention to the direction that I'm drawing with my pencil. So here he has some curly furs, so I went ahead and shaded a little bit behind those to kind of make them pop. And working on the tongue area, I'm trying to really focus on which parts are kind of darker and lighter. So on this step, I am adding some shading, and I'm using my eraser to help out. And then here, notice how tiny the pencil lines are. It's because the fur is very, very short, so I'm using very short lines. And then I see that there's some more shading in the picture, so that's what I'm going to add. And then right here, I did break that down into another grid just to make it easier because I didn't want to draw that mouth too big or too small because I knew that that would make a huge difference in my picture. So here I'm just slowly building up some of that value. And also notice that I really am paying attention to the direction the fur is going. And I'm also looking at the picture and I'm trying to see if there's any shapes that the fur is making. So I noticed that there's like little bitty triangles and little V shapes that the fur makes whenever I start shading it. All right, so down here I saw that there was some plants and stuff, so I did draw a little bit of that plant matter, and I am going to be switching back and forth between the grid to try to make sure that I have it, so I'm kind of pushing the grid up to make sure that it's lining up with the rest of it, and then adding in those shapes for the fur. So instead of doing a bunch of very long lines, I'm mostly focusing on shapes for the fur as well as shadows. So here I'm doing what we call just like a flat mat. So I'm just like shading it all one color and then going back in with my color with my pencil and my eraser to kind of help add a little bit more oomph to it. So the eraser is just as important of a tool as your pencil is. So really make sure that you utilize your eraser. You can use the eraser to get really nice fine points to it and also to kind of like add some texture to it. So here I'm just adding some of that flat mat to the background just because I think the edge of his fur is so bright that if I left the paper white that it would be really, really hard to see the whiteness of his fur. So what I'm doing is I'm just going to add a little bit more shading into the background as well as shading on some of the objects at the beginning that I didn't quite get around to shading. As you're going, once you get to this step and everything is fully drawn and you're just working on tweaking things and kind of touching up things, you can erase your grid lines when you get to this point. That way they're not in the way, and you can focus more on adding just the final textures and shading. So here what I'm doing is I'm just adding some more shading. I noticed some parts of the fur were a little bit more gray than others, so I went in with my pencil and kind of shaded it. I'm also kind of darkening in the background just to make it pop even more. Whenever you have a really, really dark area next to a really, really light area, that's called contrast. And if you have a really high contrast, it looks really good. So that's why, especially up there by that ear, I tried to make that background look super dark, is to make that ear pop out more because I really wanted it to stand out. So now I'm just going to go back through, since this is just going to be a graphite pencil drawing and I'm not going to be using any like color pencil or anything. Anyway, so I'm just going to go in with my pencil and darken in the very darkest of areas in order to make it pop. It's up to you how much detail that you're wanting to put into it. So here I've gone back and added as much detail as I possibly could. I would suggest doing a distance test, so kind of like put it against the like other side of the room and then look at it from a distance. If there's anything you see that's not popping out, add a little bit more to it. And so here you can see it has been completed, and this is after about maybe 15 minutes more of working on it, and I'm pretty satisfied with how he turned out. So best of luck. If you need any help, just let me know, and remember, make sure that you start off kind of light and then slowly build up those darks, okay? All right, have fun.